First things first, I'ma say all the words inside my head. I'm fired up and tired of the way that things have been.
So thank you so much for joining me, Masha. I had so much fun with the Pangburn hangout in our episode on Colin, and I was so fascinated with your knowledge and around childhood development and your past work with especially underprivileged, traumatized children. So I really wanted to bring you on for this particular topic. So I have been very worried about bringing up the more dark elements I fear are at play here in terms of the actual predation sexually on children, because I didn't want to be associated as a QAnon conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
And so I finally feel now that the information about Pritzker is going to be coming out, who is one of the Pritzker family is one of the main financiers and billionaires behind the insidious sort of indoctrination campaign that's been happening since around 2008. I feel like now is the time. So I wanted to have a conversation with you about that. And sort of, I guess, maybe start with a gloss over of what you see in terms of your experience and knowledge with childhood safeguarding and what you see happening right now and what causes you to be concerned as a person in the LGBT community as well, and a feminist.
Yep.
Or a female supremacist, I should say.
Female supremacist, yeah. And I mean, the only reason I would never, I would never turn my back on my feminist sisters. I think there's a lot of work still being done in that space that is informed by real feminist values of female liberation. But what I'm trying to like get distance from is that whole capitulated, like lib fem, fourth wave, like feminism that has nothing to do with females or with women or with our rights, or
the commodifying sex work as work, bending the knee to male as woman feminists. Yeah. The version of feminism, essentially. Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement there.
Yeah, and also as a signal to, in kind of a broader way that I don't like as a person who's been like moved in like queer circles and communities, as someone who mostly dates women, as someone who has always had like a complex relationship with gender. I would don't see myself as cis. I don't identify with gender. I'm like a gender atheist. I think it's all a performance, and as long as we're not taking it too seriously and it can be fun, it might be okay. But ideally, because to me gender isn't a binary, it's a hierarchy, right? So the hierarchy of gender places masculine traits at the top and feminine traits and femaleness and womanhood at the bottom. So what's happening when you call someone like me cis is you're basically accusing me of identifying with some things that to me have nothing to do with femaleness and have nothing to do with my lived experience as a gender non-conforming female, and someone who hasn't always felt super comfortable like in identifying as a woman, but like I never, I never took steps to not be seen that well, although actually I have, like as a way to protect myself. I don't know, like there was a time that in university I had a radio show called Puss in Boots, which I thought was a really spicy name for like a university radio show. It was all female fronted, like
that's so cool.
Girl bands, yeah. And we had like a really late like time slot, and like basically they just were like, yeah, just go on at like midnight and stay on as long as you want. So often I'd be like bicycling home through like a bad part of town because
where did you go to college? Like what area?
So this was back when I was in McMaster in Hamilton, which is in kind of, it's like where like industry withdrew. I would say like it's a bit like Detroit, but not as ruined. Yeah. So like the west part of town is like got the university and the research hospital. And even today, McMaster has like a giant health and like its medical school is really prominent, and it does a lot on gender. And in fact, it's got like one of the only really activist gender clinics in Canada at this point. So unfortunately, my alma mater has become really an enemy. Anyway, so I used to bike home late at night by myself, and to protect myself from male violence, I would often bind my breasts, dress in baggy pants, baggy hoodies, and like kind of just like keep my head down and bike home, like, you know, trying to adopt a masculine manner in order to stay safe from male violence. So wait, I totally lost.
No, I found that all very interesting. I really liked your response to rejecting the terminology cis, because I often have a hard time articulating it, except by saying I won't be subcategorized in my own sex. But I think that, you know, saying that gender is a hierarchy and you're telling me that I am conforming to things I'm rejecting is what you reject. And I think that's a really articulate and interesting, nuanced way to answer that, to rebuttal against being labeled as a cisgender quote woman.
Yeah. And it also inherent in that is, for me, the reason why many autogynephilic males will refuse to give up gender, will cling on to reification of gender, is because they I think sexualize objectification. Yeah. And they want that. They want to be suppressed. They want to be sissified. They want to be, you know, like they want to be objectified in a destructive way, which is what they identify with in the gender of womanhood, in that category.
Yeah, I think a lot of peaked people do this because we're very curious minds. But reading portions, because I didn't finish the whole thing, of The Whipping Girl, one of the biggest peaking moments of my life as someone who's a sexual assault survivor, as someone who knows, I mean, I don't know, I know more women that have survived sexual abuse than haven't, you know, or
Same.
I mean, every single woman that's walking the planet has had some kind of sexual violence of some kind against her.
Yeah.
To see that as the defining characteristic of what makes this man a woman, I threw the book across the room. It made me scream. I was so angry. And yeah, that was a very pivotal moment. And it's interesting because I'll often be told by people that start the conversation and are still sort of, you know, committing to their the gender ideology stuff, to learn from trans people, to hear from trans identified men what they have to say. And I'm like, well, I did, and that's why I feel this way.
Yeah.
Specifically AGP. And I think the AGP versus the dysphoric male that we've discussed in the past, in the last episode I've discussed it in one more, I still think that is such an important conversation. So what do you mean? I mean, although I already know, what do you mean by autogynephilic male?
So first of all, it's a paraphilia. And so that category of mental illness, mental distress, or like, it's basically like a mapping error of like internally experienced desire. So like it's a huge subject. It's a huge topic. Many have written about it quite extensively and gotten in a lot of trouble for it, including Dr. Blanchard.
Yes, I love his work.
Yeah.
I've discovered him on the TERF Twitterverse too.
Yeah. So to make it very, very, like, to really like cut all the nuance away, it's basically a male bodied individual who's mapped his entire sexual desire onto basically himself as a female. And the draw in that comes from the fact that it's the only woman that he'll ever be able to control completely, is his own body. So he wants the embodied feeling of like suppressing and humiliating a woman who is like mapped onto himself. So that's why these the display, the AGP displays are really important to them. It's really important to them to go out in public and to be in female spaces, because it's part of the thrill is of like watching other women sort of like have to swallow their disgust. It's, you know, it's a paraphilia that is absolutely in the same category as zoophilia and pedophilia. These are like actually deeply distressing, antisocial, non-generative like paraphilias, right? It's a dangerous for the self, dangerous for society.
Wow. I don't know that I've ever heard. I love speaking to you. I love hearing you say.
Likewise.
So I'd love to just hear your thoughts about, because I think we share a lot of the same concerns about the predatory aspect of this, especially on kids. And I don't come at it from an academic place. I come at it from a person with life experience that sees kind of patterned behavior and recognizes red flags of predatory behavior, especially the dissociation and the disconnecting from parents. And I'd love to hear you talk more about why you first developed a suspicion and what you think might be happening right now.
Yeah, so just to like kind of go back to basics, so safeguarding in the context of any like person who might be like a frontline worker, and in fact you can take a safeguarding course even as someone who works you know in hospitality, or in like the, you know, hotel front desks, or, you know, as like airline personnel. They also sometimes take this content because the trafficking of children has reached such a fevered pitch, and the grooming, etc. So safeguarding, broadly speaking, is any action that is taken to promote the welfare of children and protect them from harm. Safeguarding means protecting children from abuse and maltreatment, preventing harm to children's health and development, ensuring children grow up with the provision of safe and effective care. So that's safeguarding as we practiced it in the context of social services. So once social services are engaged, this is kind of like our primary mode is to basically center the most vulnerable, which in most situations tend to be children. And what, you know, there's many disturbing aspects of sort of like I mean, I also want to say, like, my preferred kind of way of talking about it is gender, like gender identity is one aspect, but like trans activism, and like want to disaggregate that from trans people who like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
I think that's always a good thing to reiterate, because I feel like so many people think that anyone rejecting gender ideology somehow hates trans people, and it's just never the case. I find that the people rejecting this are some of the most empathetic, caring people I've ever met in my life, that don't want harm to come to anybody, and actually truly love gender nonconformity often. So absolutely. Yeah, I think it's always a good thing to clarify.
Yes, I agree. So then I under the umbrella of gender ideology, there like several problems arise for me. One of those, and it has its kind of precedent or predecessor in the grooming gang scandal in the UK. So for the past 18 plus years in the UK, particularly in sort of like working class parts of England, these I think it's like at this point it's over 12,000 mostly young girls have been groomed, and to some extent either passed around or actively trafficked to customers by gangs who were, broadly speaking, brown men who were politically untouchable.
Yes, I have heard about this.
Right. So the reason that was allowed to go on and is still going on is because the political atmosphere created a class of people that are so virtuous and so at the top of the kind of oppression Olympics hierarchy, that they cannot be referred to in any negative terms, and the police were too afraid to go after them in any. And yeah, so that's one
being
concern.
kind of being called Islamophobic, essentially.
Right. And in
or
fact,
xenophobic.
yeah. And I mean, police officers who tried were put on leave, were fired.
Wow.
Like, whole departments were defunded because their investigation unearthed that it was a systemic grooming and trafficking on the part of specific like gangs that themselves had affiliations that were specifically ethnic. And so that's a precedent that definitely informs my concern about there being this other untouchable class, like unmentionable class, that's always virtuous, which is trans identifying males. So I personally have no concern. Like, I mean, mostly I'm not concerned about trans men, which are female, right? Like,
right. Well, I mean, yeah, they're, yeah. I mean,
like, far less, right?
I'm more concerned about the biological female commitment to pushing this than I am about the people that identify as trans.
Yes, exactly.
Handmaidens.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Because we do tend to see male pattern violence, especially sexualized violence. Yeah. And so my concern there, as it relates to grooming gangs, is that, again, there's this group of people that cannot be referred to in any negative light, especially not groomers, right? Even though we're increasingly seeing patterns of a desire to contact children, minors, a desire to engage with minors, and that engagement being contextualized as care, as advocacy, as, you know.
Oh yeah, like, I'll be your mother, I'll be your family,
right.
To me, or even like on the Mermaids, like bringing kids onto Discord chats.
Just absolutely, like, really made my blood run cold, because these are absolutely grooming tactics. Like, if you were to look in a textbook about how groomers, regardless of how they identify, go about their business, the one of the first steps is to triangulate against those that care for that child. So creating, like, a relationship of trust with the child that's based on alienating them from all other reference in their circle. So, and also making them deeply vulnerable and deeply afraid to engage any external resources that could contextualize that communication for them.
I'm curious, are you concerned, because I've seen there's been instances already in the US of social services taking children out of their homes because parents wouldn't affirm their gender identity. Are you concerned with the capturing of some of these institutions that are meant to be guarding institutions for children, that they're actually
yes
doing the opposite of what they're supposed to be doing right now?
Absolutely. And again, it's something it's one of the reasons that I got out of social work in the first place. Yeah, not that specific issue, but for I was practicing in Canada, and I was seeing a lot of Indigenous mothers basically, like, having their babies snatched on birth. Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's absolutely a horrific.
Why?
Because of,
what was the justification for that?
Again, supposedly safeguarding. So it is being, like, that concept is being turned completely inside out, right?
Oh my God, that is horrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I've been concerned for a long time that those institutions are completely captured, like ideologically captured, and that parents have become the enemy, and that children are a product, and that particularly babies, which are highly desired in, for placement with either foster families or adoption agencies, are commodified. Like, there's like a slew of
Oh,
of
so you think
issues.
there's
You
like
know?
there's like a push to say to take a child from the family just as a financial gain?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So someone
There's,
could be a fit mother with no
yeah,
problems, and
yes,
because someone's getting paid a certain amount of money, they'll just take
yeah.
the
Yes, there's a huge industry, and like the same with housing, with any services
um,
surrounding poverty. Yeah, it's easier for a young mother fleeing abuse. It's easier to for her to access medical assistance in dying than it is to access
oh, I've
housing.
been reading more about that in Canada,
Yeah,
especially
yeah,
where they're now saying like they'll as long as you want to die, essentially you'll be able to, and for young people too, like
including, yes.
and in mental distress.
Yes. Yes. Horrific. Like just absolutely unthinkable. Absolutely unthinkable. Like it's a death industry all the way around.
Now, do you think
And
that's a population control thing, like too,
I
like
do. I do. And I think that the gender ideology is implicated in that. Like gender affirming care means sterilization of
yeah.
largely gender non-conforming kids, which research tells us would, for the most part, I think 80% or more desist and simply settle into their identities
Mhm.
as usually
I think it's
same-sex
86.
attracted
Yeah,
adults, like
yeah.
gay or lesbian, late in their late teens and early 20s, completely are okay, as I became, like, you know,
Were you
that
dysphoric as a child?
definitely,
Okay.
definitely. I didn't want to be seen as female. I didn't want the male gaze. I didn't want, you know, I
Okay.
was a tomboy, and I'm sure if I was born just 10 years later, my parents would definitely have had, you know, encounters with multiple people telling them that they should affirm, like, you know, whatever. Like,
It's
I'm sure.
it's so fascinating because a lot of Americans, I'm sure I'm not alone in this, used to envy Canada, sort of like hold Canada on a pedestal of like what the US should be like. And lately, it's terrifying me what they're doing. Like they're the worst with self-ID, with incarcerated women. They're the worst with taking kids from their family. They're the worst in terms of now saying it's not an official mandate, but basically saying if you don't get the vaccine that you'll be put on psychiatric medication. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, Canada is
Yeah.
got a problem.
I think Canada, to be honest, I don't really see any sovereignty left here.
No,
I think we're like an experimental ground for World Economic Forum
I
policies, you know, like
agree.
that. Yeah, completely.
And I get nervous with talking about these things, but I mean,
Yeah,
there's just too, I mean, when you look at what's going on with the Netherlands, with the farmers, like
yeah,
it's becoming, yeah, I do think that there's a whole sort of like push for the new world order, World Economic Forum. And I know it's going to make me sound like a conspiracy theorist to some, but if you look at what's happening, you know, it's
yeah.
just, now I'm curious, because this is, and when I try to have in-person conversations about, not telling, you know, that some people think it's justified to not tell parents necessarily that a child is identifying as trans because of the potential violence they might face at home. Like as someone who's worked in childcare and protecting children, how would you respond to that kind of criticism or devil's advocate, you know, playing devil's advocate?
Well, I mean, in my experience, there's like a lot of these things are contextual. So like the harm that a child is experiencing, the danger. I mean, we're very used to like that idea in the modern world that like there's no such thing as stranger danger, that like children especially are the most vulnerable in their own home. And the fact is that in this modern world, children are very much in danger from contact on the internet, like, you know, in their school bathroom, in the stairwell. There's these places where children encounter very dangerous situations, and in my experience, particularly mothers tend to be a very capable, certainly like can report very capably about their children's condition, especially one-on-one. And like, you know, it gets complicated, but I'm very reticent to sever that primary care relationship between a mother and child, because it is a lifeline, and that child, regardless of like, one of the worst things that we will see in social work is a child who has like where the maternal bond isn't present, where there's been neglect. It's one of the reasons that neglect tends to have a worse effect on a child than physical abuse. Is, you know, so I really, my kind of alignment for that was always to try to support particularly the mother, to try and figure out like the source of the trouble. And I think that I personally, like, culturally have a belief that children belong to their mothers, that mothers should be supported.
I was raised primarily by a single mother, and I think Trevor Noah had a really good bit on that, or essentially like the dad's going to go back and, like, you know, save the child from the snake or save the child from the lion, but he's going to be resentful of it, and he's going to, like, you know, like kind of like this, and the mother's just going to run into the lion's den and just be like, go get her baby. And I think that that's by and large true. The connection of mother and child is something that's so powerful and innate.
Yes. So I think that a mother needs to be supported in caring for her child, and needs to be empowered to understand that child. And I think there's ways to keep them both safe. I think in terms of safeguarding, there would be, for me, a much higher danger in keeping secret, like telling a child to keep secrets from their mother. This is grooming. This is what we see with groomers, is like, oh, you and me have a secret, you and me have special names that we refer to each other as, your mother wouldn't understand, you and me have a completely special relationship that you can't talk about at home. Oh, this is all, for me, implicated in grooming. And even if it isn't in that moment a grooming relationship with that teacher or whoever it is that's encouraging this, like, trans identity and not telling, that it's certainly setting up that child.
I very much think that there's good people just paving the way to hell and just enabling abusers without having any idea that they're doing it. I think that they think they're doing what's right. I really believe that they're just captured ideologically. They're captured. And do you think that that was a primary force in terms of, you know, billionaires funding this movement? Was the predation on kids, not just, which was interesting because I recently spoke to a friend of mine who works a lot in terms of pharmaceutical funding, and he's like, Caitlin, there's just not the money there that you think there is. It's not profitable. And I don't necessarily agree with him, but he's like, this is what I do for work. He's like, Pfizer won't touch it because they don't, you know, it's not making the money. And I was like, and he's like, the Pritzkers, they're most of their money's in hotels. Like, I don't think that you're like, I was like, well, I'm saying follow the money in terms of what they're funding. But I wonder if it is partly the untethered access to kids that is the reason for spending this money.
Yes. I think in some of the shadowy corners, there's definitely, I mean, just overall, I think if you look at the culture overall, there's a cultural shift happening where we are being asked to accept more and more the sexualization of ever younger children, right? And so these are inextricable things, and there's multiple profit models. It doesn't have to be puberty blockers by themselves. It means the lifelong medicalization of these children. It means like an absolute cascade of like terrible medical interventions that will be necessary, as you and I discussed.
Exactly.
With me, right? Yeah, so it doesn't have to just be, oh, the direct, like,
I think that's a big point of it. Or just like, because, like, you know, I saw recently an advertising, you know, for Trans Awareness Week, a specialist in osteoporosis and bone health, basically directly advertising to trans identified people because they're going to be more likely to have osteoporosis. And it's like, that's the money element
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
It's like, it's long term,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
I'll just quickly tell you, like, and I'm not sure, like, what you'll have to decide later whether you want to include this, because this is a specific case that that I was close to. So there was a child in care who went back to his mother, but he had a really complex diagnosis, and he had a lot of needs for care. His mother was a capable caregiver, but there was she needed a lot more support. So he spent some time in hospital and being stabilized and so forth. And as he was growing into adolescence, his mother asked if we could, like, she basically applied to have him to have his puberty blocked so that he wouldn't continue to get physically bigger, because she was really struggling just with his physical size in his care.
Oh,
right.
okay.
Yeah. So then we followed that through up the chain and so forth. And the sort of like senior caseworker came back to us with like, we have to look into this family more, because she'd been kind of on duty and experienced that not only the Munchausen's by proxy, the idea that parents are getting some sort of thrill and attention from a trans child, but also that she'd directly had a case where a young girl was in foster care, and her carers applied, like under the auspices of like gender troubles, to have her puberty blocked. And it turned out that it was their concern that the clients that they had been lining up for her would get her pregnant, and they wanted her kept small so that she would continue to be able to be sold on the basis of being a child. So that, like, absolutely, that is a direct line, like that is a commodity, commodifying the bodies of children is to me completely a thing that is happening, probably within, I don't know, I'm going to say 10 miles of like any major city in North America.
I definitely want to include that. I think anecdotal stories are really powerful, and I think that you have so much knowledge about the data behind your thinking too, that it just bolsters your argument. But that broke my heart.
I know, it's horrific, and I think that people I mean, here's the thing, is I know that I can talk about these things, it's horrible, but it's no longer, like, very few things can surprise me anymore. And one of the chief things that doesn't surprise me is that abusers will do whatever that they have to gain access to
they're
prey.
Compulsive.
Yes.
It's a compulsion. And yes, that's what shocks me, is that somehow we've had a blind spot with this particular issue, when we know this is fact. It's not really disputable.
Yes.
Wow, this has been an incredible episode. To be honest, I don't even think we have to record another one. I feel like this was a perfect way to, and I also would love to do more and more with you, because I think you're an incredible person to talk to. But what I always like to end things with is what would you say to someone right now who has the same concerns as we do, but is afraid to speak out?
There's just, it's, like, as Posey Parker says, Kelly J. Keane, the house is on fire. We have to get the kids out. Yeah. There's no more of this shit about like, oh, I might lose my job. Like, the house is absolutely on fire, and it's under the floorboards. It's everywhere. There's just no more time to waste. Like, there's no amount of capitulation that'll be enough. There's no amount of like, yes, trans women are women, all of that stuff, parroting the mottos. None of that will save you from the consequences if this becomes the mass culture. Like, so get the fuck up and fight it now.
Amen. Well, as always, it's a pleasure. I can't wait to, stay in contact with you and hopefully do more sort of episodes like this and just continue learning from you, because it's been an honor and a privilege, Masha.
Thank you so much. Likewise, thanks so much for coming on my show, and I'm so glad to have opened this channel. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
You too. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
You too.